What makes metal black? These days there's a lot of discussion about whether or not something is appropriately classified as being black metal. There's certainly, and I know it when I hear it, elements, since black metal does have a signature sound, but I'm not interested in defining the limits of what true black metal is here. Instead, I want to take a look at the sounds we so commonly associate with black metal and discuss how they contribute to the identity of the music. If we just skim the surface, the first thing that comes to mind would be tremolo picking, blast beats, harsh vocals, the stuff we commonly hear. On the production side, you'll find heavy reverb and lo-fi production, so there's certainly a combination of sounds that's instantly recognizable. But none of this is actually unique to black metal, even in the exact combination I've described. Other styles of extreme metal and hardcore punk rely on the same techniques, although maybe not as heavily. In the end, these are all just aesthetic choices, and not really exclusive ones either. I believe what constitutes a genre or a style of music has to do with the composition, how the music is constructed. In a way, the techniques you use do matter because genres are derived from a common sound, but my point here is that they're not essential to the identity. I actually believe you can write a song that fully captures the essence of black metal without using a single one of these techniques. Still, there's the question of why they ended up being so strongly associated with the style. One of the goals you want to achieve when writing a black metal song is creating the wall of sound, and when you combine techniques like tremolo picking and blast beats, it sets the foundation for all of that. Blast beats are pretty straightforward. It's a standard backbeat, just played 4 times faster. Tremolo picking is the same idea. You just rip 16th notes on the guitar. Bonus points if it's a minor third. Now, the faster you go, the more restricted you are to moving around the fretboard, which is why black metal riffs tend to use only adjacent strings since they allow for a wide range of motion. You can refer to my old 2-note riff video on that. Because tremolo picking doesn't contain the rhythmic changes of a typical metal riff, say something like the Trooper, the idea of the riff itself is defined by the harmonic changes. One of the all-time great black metal riffs is Hordaland's Dødsgavad 3. As you can see, that harmony moves all over the place on the fretboard, and this is where the third technique, harsh vocals, works brilliantly together. Now, the main reason harsh vocals are so commonly used is because it's an extreme technique, but on top of that, you really wouldn't want to do clean vocals over a riff like this anyway, because you're just going to clash with the guitar parts, unless of course you pull something like an Aussie and you just sing along with the riffs. So when you combine these techniques together, it's a quick and dirty way to produce a wall of sound that captures the raw and hypnotic fury of black metal. But that's just the top level stuff. Slightly more intricate are reverb and lo-fi. They're both production choices, and we'll start with lo-fi, which more or less began out of necessity since teenagers in Norway weren't going to have access to anything better than a cheap 4-track recorder. So of course everything had that grainy sound to it. But as black metal carried into the later 90s and bands were starting to get signed, they still made the intentional decision to keep the quality low even though they might have had access to better equipment. The obvious example being Burzum's Filosofem and Olver's Nathan's Madrigal. Reverb, on the other hand, I think carried out of the 80s tradition of pretty much saturating everything with reverb, and it just kind of stuck around. But really, what does this stuff accomplish for black metal? One of the key words is atmosphere, and there's this thought that both lo-fi and reverb somehow correlate with the level of atmosphere in a song. I would disagree with that, not that I'm against the use of them. The quality of my own music is pretty poor, and I think you have to have reverb on everything. But with all things, there's a proper way to use it and a much easier way to abuse it. If we go back to my original point, the essence of black metal, things like atmosphere, should be composed, and these production techniques play a part in contributing and enhancing the sound. They should not, however, be used as a substitute to make up for a lack of compositional atmosphere. My focus is mainly going to be on reverb, which is the effect produced by sound waves bouncing off the surrounding environment. And one of the great things about reverb is that it captures the real acoustics of the live recording conditions. Different frequencies are absorbed and reflected based on how the walls are shaped, what they're made of, where you place your mic. This is what production actually refers to, and that itself is an art form. The unfortunate thing is that it's too easy to just record DI and lose all of that by throwing on a reverb effect in post-production and pushing sliders around to modulate things digitally. This is pretty similar to the next topic, lo-fi. I think this is a misconception of what the word raw means. The inherent harshness of black metal coming from the use of distortion, the speed, the screams, there's already a very raw element that's there. So I think the more you mess with something, the more you start to take away from that. If you're recording on an 8-track, I think that's really cool, but if you're recording a perfect DI signal and using compression, other distortion effects to clip and fake lo-fi sound in post-production, it's not really the same thing. You can reduce the quality as much as you want, but I would consider something heavily modulated to be less raw and not more. It's a difference that makes Philosophem a legendary album and billions attempts of copying it pointless. So now that I've just very briefly skimmed our favorite techniques, it's time to get to the real point that I want to make. How is black metal composed? How do you create atmosphere and build the wall of sound? Non-black metal takes a very traditional rock and roll approach. You start with a rhythm section, guitar riff, bass line that usually doubles the riff over the top of a very basic drum pattern, and you go from verse, chorus, A-B type arrangement. You might have an intro and an outro, sometimes you have a pre-chorus or a bridge. This all together forms the backing track. Then you set your vocals on top, and after a second chorus you might do a solo over the riffs to replace a verse. Essentially you have two separate components, the backing track and the leads. Black metal is different in that everything comes in at once. The wall of sound is built layer by layer, just like a real wall. Atmosphere comes from how those layers interact with each other. Guitars on top of guitars, blast beats and double kicks all moving together. The value of reverb is that it helps blend these independent tracks together and it keeps them consistent. Beyond those aesthetics, there are more fundamental aspects of post-production that can help breathe life into your song. Dynamic leveling and EQ, how you pan your tracks. The techniques play a role in forming the signature sound, but the essence of black metal really comes on how you put it all together. So with that covered, I want to talk about two topics that I find very interesting. The first is the prevalence of hybrid genres that combine black metal, in many cases very well, with other styles of music. The other point is on black metal covers of non-black metal songs, which is kind of a similar idea. Both will rely heavily on some of these points. Within metal, black metal combines well with pretty much every other subgenre, which is not surprising since they all share some common ground. Black and Death, Black and Doom. The best example, of course, would be Dissection with black metal and melodic death metal. It just makes sense that these things would fit together very well. The interesting part is how well it works outside of metal, especially with things like post-rock and shoegaze, which is all the rage in terms of how popular it is, and also how mad people like to get over it on the internet. I'm obviously a huge fan of both Aglock and Alcest, both of whom are innovators in their respective style and play a huge influence in my approach towards songwriting. But overall, I do have a lot to criticize about the way a lot of bands, and I might even say most, approach this hybridization. What it boils down to is that I feel like there's an over-reliance on combining the techniques together, and it's the same reason I would criticize any regular black metal music. You can tremolo pick under blast beats, throw a ton of reverb, and call it a black metal song, but it's really just going to be a cheap copy of Transylvanian Hunger. Similarly, the bad way to do post-gaze is to tremolo pick clean guitars and play movie samples over blast beats. Just throw different techniques together in a really aimless manner. It's where musicians fail regardless of genre. And the result is you create something that's very generic. Just like writing a pure black metal song, if you're combining genres together, you have to consider what it is you're trying to create. With post-rock and shoegaze, the aim is actually quite similar to black metal. It's about building a sense of atmosphere, although it might not be in the same way as the raw, dark atmosphere of black metal. But the vast layered sounds of post-rock and shoegaze are precisely why they combine well, when from a top-level standpoint it really shouldn't, because the end result is the same. So really what you need to do is find a balance between your styles and build the music from the ground up using the basic principles. The same goes for my last topic, black metal covers of non-black metal songs. I've been pretty repetitive in this video so far, so you probably know what's coming. If you want to cover a non-black metal song in the black metal style, what you don't want to do is just tremolo pick the riff and add blast beats and scream all the clean vocals. The way to really do a good cover is to break the song down and rewrite it in the black metal style. Create the layers, build the wall of sound, using the techniques if you have to. But I think it's entirely possible to do a black metal song without using a single one of these techniques at all. And I'm going to end on what I think is the greatest black metal cover of all time. It's Talk's cover of Cold by The Cure. If you listen closely to the song, there's no blast beats. There's a single part of the song where there's a tremolo picked lead that comes in. But overall, none of the riffs are tremolo picked. There's no harsh vocals, and Talk has never been a band that relied on heavy reverb or lo-fi production. All in all, it's not built using the typical black metal technique, so it doesn't sound like something that you would expect when you think of a black metal song. But if you listen to the music, it really does capture that black metal essence, while also retaining The Cure's original goth punk sound. All in all, I think that's exactly how a cover should be done. It's also how any black metal styled song should be done. So you should go take a listen, compare it to the original, and I hope it helps get my points across.